now. And good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I hope everybody is having a good week so far. We'll be getting this session going in just a couple of moments, but we're opening it now just a few seconds early so that people can join the session and kind of be ready to go by the 4 p.m. hour. Once again, you're in the right place. This is the ISACA South Florida presentation of Standards versus Hackers and Lawmakers, which is presented by Digital Edge and their business partners. And we're very thankful to have them helping us do this. This was an excellent presentation yesterday and a lot of informative content and a really great experience. So we look forward to another good session this afternoon as we go from 4 to 6 today. So I'll go ahead and get the introductions started very briefly. Once again, I am Rob Valdez, and I'm serving as chapter president. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And then also on the line with us is Ryan Barras. Ryan is the director of programming for our chapter, and we're very grateful to Ryan and to the programming committee for putting together this event and helping us keep providing this quality content that we have for the chapter. And once again, this is a Zoom session that does have engagement activities and options in it. So we encourage you to use the Zoom native client in your local host. And if you don't have that available, then we recommend that you go ahead and attempt to use the Chrome web version of Zoom, because you can probably participate in the polling and Q&A with the Chrome version. And you can always reach out to us via chat or ask your questions via Q&A module, which is down at the control panel of the session. And if you do put questions in that module, it does allow us to have some questions pre-populated to actually ask of our speaker either during or after their presentation as they choose to handle those questions. So that's our welcomes and introductions, at least initially. And as you can see, we're doing this now, and then we'll have the presentation, which will go from, or the two presentations, which will go from approximately 4:05 to about 5:55 or so. And then since there are two presentations in this slot, there's going to be some time for Q&A in there, some time for pollings and other types of things. And then at the very end, kind of near the top of the hour, approaching 6 o'clock, we'll go ahead and do the wrap up for this session and make sure that we make any kind of final comments or announcements that we need to. So with that, I'll actually go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And once again, ask Michael and Yana and the Digital Edge team to go ahead and take over the presentation, and please take it away.
Yana, are you going to be sharing, or I should? I think I should. 1 second, let me, because we're just switching order a little bit. Give me 1 second. 1 second, 1 second, 1 second. I'm sharing. Do you see my screen?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
1 second from current slide. I guess I need to move it. 1 second. Wrong screen. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, if you click on display settings and swap.
Yeah. 1 second. Yeah. This one. Now we see the presentation, right?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about risk, and later to show like our methodology, how we suggest managing risk. We have our own practical view on risk management, and risk management is cornerstone of multiple framework, multiple methodologies, and what is more important, and I wanted to emphasize it. I don't know if Keith did it yesterday, but risk becomes one of the identifying factors if law enforcement will go against you and say that you did enough or you didn't do enough. So risk becomes one of the kind of like measuring stick of if organization took cybersecurity issues seriously. So this, I think, is something that we analyzed latest lawsuits and how government and prosecutors are talking about risk. So laws and regulations do not expect that all information security incidents will be prevented. So nobody was saying that, like you are only guilty and there is a penalty if you are breached or there is a cybersecurity incident or a hack or information is stolen. So the precedence for law enforcement and for penalties is not based on cybersecurity incidents, but how you were prepared for them and what you did before. So also cybersecurity standards or frameworks do not guarantee that full implementation, even full implementation, will protect from all the attacks. But the government make us responsible for implementing necessary safeguards to prevent harm to our clients. And this is essence of duty to care. Judges use duty to care to determine liability in data breaches. And FTC requires a risk assessment to demonstrate reasonability of the controls. GDPR requires protection of privacy based on the risk analysis. Basically, the idea is this. If there is a cybersecurity risk, it has to be analyzed and appropriate budgets and controls should be implemented. If let's say business is making, I don't know, $100, you cannot require business to invest $200 or I don't know, even $50. It should be a reasonable amount defined by business. This is amount of money that we are spending on securing information of our clients, and this is like clearly notice from the government how they are looking at things. So our goals as cybersecurity professionals, compliance professionals, to implement reasonable safeguards, and then to be able to prove that those safeguards are actually reasonable. And the definition for them to be reasonable is that we did all these risk assessments and risk treatment, whatever it is. And also our argument is that when if, and God forbid, you are in front of judge or prosecutor or any like federal agencies are involved, if you say that I fully implemented, I took NIST, and as you know, there are maturities, and even you on maturity, on the lowest maturity, but you took a framework and you fully implement the framework, it would basically prove that you did a reasonable thing. We see in SMB world, and we specifically talking about SMB world right now, we see that cybersecurity guys who like practitioners, they implement, I don't know, top 10, for example, for CIS. But it would not be enough because risk assessment must be done, and it must be done properly. So yeah, we have to throw these questions during the conversation. So if you guys can, I don't know, the audience just wanted to kind of like gauge your experience. We wanted to see what is your opinion when what is the possible location for fileless malware. Did you guys have any experience with malware altogether, and fileless, what it means, and if you saw examples of the location? You could throw your answers to chat if you want.
Excellent. So people can use the chat module to put, I suppose, A or B or C or D to answer this question, which is what is the
Oh,
possible location of
some
fileless malware?
some strong group. Wow. I disagree with D. Nice answers. So, guys, if you wanted to comment, and as I said yesterday, that it's all a matter of experience, and basically boot sector, yeah, could be USB, could be WMI database. This is what they mostly call this um, fileless malware. And what we were seeing is basically people write a little script in WMI database, and they use WMI triggers to trigger those scripts. And sometimes they use, for example, trigger for refresh of list of latest accessed files. I think it runs like every minute to execute that script, and it's very hard to find it because that actually body of the malware doesn't have any file associated with it, and it basically sits in WMI database. I mean, DLL kind of, yeah, there are like injections, and new technology is when people basically analyze DLL when they wanted to inject the virus, and uh, they cut the virus in like little pieces and right inside the DLL, not to the end, but in something called code caves. When compiler compiles an executable, it pads certain things with basically a no operation assembly code. So there are, like, we call them code caves, and they write the body of malware right in those code caves. And each the way the infection works. It cuts the virus into different pieces, so it's totally different every time when the virus gets injected into DLL. So I kind of agree with all answers. We could consider that those are like fileless malware because there is no file associated, specifically associated uh, with so let's move on. Problem with cybersecurity risks. So there is no standard. Even NIST admits that decisions are often made based on the individual uh, instinct or knowledge of the conventional wisdom and typical practices. So there is no standard. It's very hard to come up with something. There are certain work done by CIS to kind of standardize it. There are some guys that are saying that, oh, all the risks are the same. Just take a list of the risks and run with them. I kind of disagree with that too. Uh, Now, some people use a system-based approach, saying, okay, we run Oracle or we run two servers, and they basically run risk only based on the systems or on the hardware that is um, that they have. We certainly all know it's not a problem, but like conventional risk um, uh, rating goes, likelihood impact rating, and it comes from like older uh, industrial risks. It's very easy to kind of say that we have this valve. If we put like another safety on that valve, we would reduce risk by 90%. And then we put another valve, then we would totally get rid of residual risk. I argue that it's totally impossible to do it in cybersecurity. So another statement that I wanted to make, and it's kind of like criticism of FAIR. Um, and we could see all these cases recently, like fair methodology. It would be good if you guys, anyone implemented fair. It would be really cool to see it in chat. But fair methodology is trying to put risk, financial impact, and calculate financial impact. And our argument is this: like, let's say you got ransomware, and how do you know how much they're going to ask uh, for the unencryption key? And today it's hard to calculate the impact, but tomorrow it will be even harder. So if anyone has had experience with FAIR methodology and trying to implement FAIR, it would be nice if you comment in the chat. Also, there is a problem of granularity and manageability issues, because you could try to make like very granular risks, but then uh, it will become very hard to manage those risks. Uh, Also, we say that risks are multidimensional. So sometimes, impact would be in the financial area. Sometimes government penalties. Sometimes it's impact of on your reputation. So again, like I understand that fair is kind of very nice model and everything, but I don't know if investing all this effort in trying to calculate that, if it'll pay back. And I see the comment in the chat: our team has used fair to model subscription event for business impact analysis. Thank you very much. Um, uh, Also, treatment and residual risks. Like when the risk is industrial, it's easy kind of to measure and figure out residual risks. In cybersecurity, I would argue that this residual, the whole notion of residual risk is very questionable, how much to measure it. Uh, Likelihood problem also is very hard to calculate without statistical things. Again, when you deal with industrial machinery, there is a big uh, uh, experience of using these machines and statistics and stuff like that. In cybersecurity, it's hard to say by equipment that you have what would be the likelihood, and it's all like experience of uh, experience of risk professionals or compliance professionals when they can kind of assess likelihood, but we will address likelihood later. Also dynamic in nature. So let's say we use FAIR or anything else to calculate actual risk. And today we have, I don't know, 90% of risk mitigated. But then in the evening, we got zero-day vulnerability, and that's it. All your calculation is totally going out of the window. Um, so the risk is constantly shifting. So it could be new vulnerability here or there. It could be new situation. You could be implementing new technology. So it's very hard to constantly calculate and say that, yeah, we know that this is like 90%. And some people are so stuck on calculating these risks that I think it's just counterproductive. And today, we don't see how to like really use it effectively and calculate actual impact and rating. But let's see what can be done, and our kind of like advice is how to do it, and uh, actual usage, and how we do it. So number one, we use risks to select controls, because if you don't have a risk, why would you implement the control? And I'm pretty sure you know, like ISO 27. And there is like statement of applicability, and technically what you should do is you should define the risk, and then you should select controls to mitigate this risk. So again, very good application of risk is to select controls. Also, we really suggest to give the report to executives so they understand what it is and then they sign up for it, because unfortunately sometimes uh, organizations are making cybersecurity people responsible for um, certain things that that organization didn't do, even though uh, it's not cybersecurity. It's not cybersecurity role to accept the risk. So executives have to accept the risk, and we as cybersecurity specialists, compliance specialists, must push executive to understand the risk, and those acceptance must be done formally by them. Also, one of the function of risk is to capture historical view. We wanted to go through live year by year, and we should collect statistics of incidents that are correlated to risks. So I'll show you later, like in our practice, what we do, we always tie incidents to risks. And then we could say, really, like, someone would feel that likelihood is high, but within the last 10 years, we see zero incidents that are related to these risks. So you could lower the rating of this risk, but certain things getting hits more often, and you could raise the likelihood of those risks. So history of events related to risks is very important, because it shows where budgets needs to be allocated. We could measure effectiveness of our program, because uh, I will show you we use incidents, and we file incidents even when the attack was mitigated, because then we could report to the business that we had I don't know, 20 attempts of uh, let's say someone was trying to email spoofing, and try to convince people to give out their passwords, and our mitigation, like, nobody opened them, and our mitigation is like 100%, has 100% effectiveness. So it's very important to constantly change properties of the risk. Also, as I said, we adjusting likelihood based on the number of incidents, and we report this effectiveness to executives. We adjust controls by applying different properties to risks, and it also helps us to request budgets and review the situation from the risk standpoint. Here is standard kind of, it's not all the properties, but we are trying to kind of say what we are adding and how we are enriching normal approach to risk of different frameworks. So, I mean, risks have normally, when you have risk registry, you put like title in there, probably, or name, or whatever. Management type, you have to say if you're mitigating, if you're outsourcing, if you're accepting. Some people are saying that some other properties, we use only these three because I think there is like reducing. Some people are saying uh, I don't remember like other terminology, but we use only these three. Also, they have like type, category, classifications, context, location, owner. We seriously suggest to apply CIA factor to each risk. If you don't know what CIA is, please write in chat. We'll stop on it. I think CIA is very important. Um, and then what we do, we put likelihood, and we are constantly changing this likelihood, and we are measuring. this likelihood, and we are measuring and changing effectiveness all the time. So this is okay. What is CIA? CIA factor is introduced, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was introduced by FIPS government standard, and it's uh, uh, when you do information classification, you have to classify what can be what could happen with information is what is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's say you have an information, could be a disclosure, but integrity of information is intact. So it would be confidentiality factor would be impacted, or if there is a risk of data cannot be exfiltrated, but it could be changed or corrupted. This is your integrity. And availability, again, it may be confidentiality, could be untouched, and integrity could be okay, but with, let's say, uh, someone knock out your services, your availability would be suffering. Uh, So when you define a risk and when you define your information classification, you have to define, and FIP standard basically saying that, okay, this is your information. Let's say this is financial information of my company. What is your confidentiality? Probably high. What is your integrity? High. What is your availability? Probably medium, because you could survive without this information for like day or two. Now, if there is a marketing information, so you classify another class of information is marketing, and you say confidentiality is low, everybody should be able to see it. Integrity probably medium, and availability probably high. So and you basically specify. So each information classification should have and FIPS define how to measure these CIA factors and how to apply those values to each information classification. So when we create a risk, we are saying that this risk is specifically to this information type or informational system, and what is CIA factor would this risk um, affect. So as I said, we constantly do risk adjustment. And risk adjustment, what we do with risk adjustment, we use incidents to um, go through company life cycle and change risk properties. So we do initial risk analysis. Then with each incident, certainly most likely cybersecurity incident response team got involved. Then there is a post-mortem and incident write-up done when the company is doing like post-mortem or whatever. And then we go and we adjust risk properties. I'll show you in a bit how. Now, with incident management, we have certainly like all the fields, all the information we capture, as I don't know, ISO suggests or NIST or whatever. And we enriching it. What we do is we tie each incident to a risk. So if there is an incident and you cannot apply that incident to a risk, you have to create a risk. But incident should be something happen. We should clearly understand what risk was hit. Then we also apply property called effectiveness control, and we specify for now if it is effective, partially effective, not effective, or not applicable. And again, so let's say we have in our SIEM, we see that someone clicked on antivirus and on a malicious I don't know, link, let's say, and anti-malware software stopped it. We would still register this incident, and we would say that we apply it to a certain risk, and we say that effectiveness is it was effective. So we suggest to do it because it shows executives that cybersecurity department is doing its work and it's effective. So um, I just wanted to ask you a question. In the case of cybersecurity breach, what is the first action that you should do? A is preserve artifacts, eradicate the intruder, read policies and procedures, and understand the motive. Please reply in chat. Yeah, yeah, mostly it will be. uh, can you also throw in chat if you have a formal incident response plan? Wow, finally. All right, cool. So lots of people saying yes. Now, in your cybersecurity incident plan? Wow, ICC again. In your cybersecurity plan, do you have multiple teams and multiple functions, or only one? Uh, Please, like, whomever answer yes to the cybersecurity plan, just say if it is one kind of threat of actions or multiple. Cross-function team, yeah. Multiple teams, multiple. Great. So when you have multiple teams, why I'm asking this? Cross-functional, all nice, but here's my question. Like, how do you do? Like, you have these teams, and even though they are trained, do you remember right away what is your legal obligations to report the incident, and who, in which case you have to report it to your attorney general or whomever, depending on where you are in which state. Like, there are certain obligations, and you basically on a timing to report this. Sometimes it's 24 hours, sometimes it's 72 hours. So I'm highly recommending to use to select choice C and reread policies and procedures. I'm not saying that you have to like read and whatever, but there are very valuable information how communication should be organized. And if you start figuring out right away, just based on your intuition, you may make mistakes. So we highly recommend, those policies and procedures are done for specific reasons. And yeah, I mean, you guys really wanted to preserve artifacts or eradicate people, but someone at least should sit down, go through it, and okay, these are our legal obligations. We have to do this and this and that. And that person, yeah, and someone probably needs to be assigned in your organization to communicate with your clients, figure out the response, figure out the media, whatever it is. So uh, my personal opinion, I had a criticism when people saying that, oh, professor is not sure because he said it's his opinion. First of all, I'm not a professor, I'm a practitioner. I'm exchanging my experience and asking for your experience, but I would really suggest someone in the organization should read policies and procedures during the cybersecurity incident. One second, breach notification plan. Each state in US has different requirements. Need to decide if event need to do. Yeah, I see that people in the here kind of agreeing with me. Thank you very much. So let me show you how we do it, and it's not we are not promoting our SIEM tool, not SIEM, GRC tool. Uh, I mean, I would be happy if you ask me questions about that, but it's not, you know, reason for this. But what I'm saying is this is a view of risks and controls. It's kind of like an example, but we, every time when we have incident, we assign a risk to an incident. So executives could see the count of incidents, whatever happened during the year, and then we apply effectiveness. So we could easily see that we had 5 incidents and we have zero effectiveness. And this is the whatever the risk is, this is where people should put money in, and you should figure out, you should say, okay, we have all these controls assigned to this risk and nothing works. So we have to figure out something else. Or the organization could say, okay, we're accepting this risk, and you know, also acceptance of the risk is very kind of like hazy subject, because some things like high trust would argue you cannot accept this risk, but it's more complex. One second. Yeah, I'm just reading chat, and yeah, people are agreeing with me. So again, just an example how we dynamically apply experience of different clients regarding to different risks, and show executives the possible mitigation, our mitigation. Now, there are a few suggestions that we wanted to give you, overall, not necessarily related to risks. Just wanted to throw, we have like only 1 hour for this, and I want to give you a few advices. So for vendor management, as you know, like I think all cybersecurity frameworks, they are requiring vendor management. So when you create vendor management program, we would suggest not to create your own questionnaires. If you're on ISO, or if you're on NIST, or whatever it is, just figure out the same questionnaire and send it to your vendors, because on another side it would be another cybersecurity or compliance guy who would understand right away. Like, we really don't like when we receive a questionnaire and it's based on like something. It's very easy to reply to questionnaire when it's based on NIST, you recognize it right away, or if it's based on anything, PCI, high trust, CIS benchmarks, doesn't matter, on some kind of a standard, because people studying the standards. And so it would be good, you could cut it out, you could make it like shorter, you don't have to put all the questions in the domain, but you know, like standardize this audit for everybody the same, and use standards for those questions. Also, you know, it will require SLA definitions. It's sometimes it's hard, but when you have this SLA, it's very easy to basically show auditors that these SLAs were met or not met, and decision to continue with a vendor or raise a flag, depending on your situation, depending on your relationship with vendors. But it's a really cool idea to set up SLA for each vendor, even like one. Uh, Also, contractual language. It's very important with um, privacy laws to have correct contractual language. Do you guys, if you could throw in a chat, if you guys have a practice, I don't know if you have a role or you assume a role of DPO. Uh, it's like a privacy officer. If you review contractual language, and I'll show you a few examples where it's like almost like a must. If you could throw in chat if you have DPO role and if you are reviewing contracts for proper language. Nice. Yeah, cool. At least some people do. So like specifically like in medical or even like in financial, it's very important. Like sometimes like we play DPO role for multiple clients, and we see like they want to hire developers. Let them give access to they're doing reports, reviewed by legal. It's very, yeah, BAA. Okay, so this is one thing, BAA and legal. It's all okay, but the problem is who can touch the data and who can touch actual PII. And we see a situation when legally it's a very cool contract, but what if and the organization is saying, oh, these guys have these developers, they wanted to do only reporting on production database. We'll give them access to production database, and we would give them read-only so they cannot screw anything up. And we saw it in medical industry. And when we as DPO, we said, no way, we have to mask the data, we have to reload the data, because in your HIPAA disclosure, you say who can see the data, and you clearly allowing third party access your production data without disclosing it to your clients. And it's okay if you want to do it, but technically you have to change your disclosure statement, and all your clients have to technically resign it, because if you go ahead with this contract the way it's set up, it's a big potential problem. So it's very important to review contractual language, and specifically who can touch the data, who can access the data, what are the role of the people that are touching this data. Specifically, someone mentioned BAA here, so it's very important. And I think you guys saying that legal reviewing it, I think it's a time to assume this privacy role, maybe educate yourself, because in the future more and more organizations will need a review of DPO type of capacity, DPO type of capacity people. So it's kind of like a new role for grab. And people in DPO position will have lots of power in the company, because they should have a rights to say this contract cannot go. And I can give you other examples, like non-for-profit organization. It's very easy for them to just give, okay, this is like marketing company, let's take all our information, the whole like CRM database, give it to them, they will do an email blast. It's so common in non-for-profit industry. Now, if you have PHI there, it's a huge problem. Even though you just give them, give a third party something that would consist PII, and all different states consider PII differently, it's a big problem. And right now, government does not really like enforce it. I mean, they enforce when there is a problem, but we see in financial world that more and more people are coming with penalties for different reasons. So it will be more and more enforcement for mishandling of privacy information, and specifically for healthcare information. We have control over vendor on who, what they can access for what purpose, and time bound. Before the that practice, it was simply without this. Yeah, very nice, Olivia. It's yeah, very nice comment, because it's so important, and it's so important for us as a professionals to teach the organization and explain executives that must be done. Just show them a few cases, and I can tell you, I don't know if Keith told you or not. FTC, they constantly throwing these penalties and lawsuits and whatever. Just grab a few examples, show it to executives, and say, give me a DPO title. Maybe learn a little bit, study, read something, and it's a new title for grab. Uh, so next one, education. So education should be separated by education of general employees and privileged users. Some, I'm sorry, yeah, some frameworks requiring to do it. So people with admin privileges should have different training. So like your IT people, like normal users would have, like anti-spam training, don't click, don't breathe, but you have to run your IT through a different type of training, more severe, and it should be logged. Uh, I understand that some frameworks are more or less hazy, but yeah, privileged users should be educated separately. Um, Reviews and audits. We just wanted to um, say a few things about it. It's very hard to control them, because um, technically, some companies in the end of the year, they're like, oh, we had to have four reviews of our like firewall logs, and they do it, you know, uh, right in the end, all four of them. So we really suggest to use some kind of like GRC tool or something. It needs to be a tool. Uh, when companies under like harder frameworks, like high trust, for example, some audits and some reviews are forced on you, and some of them are like very frequent. And what we found is that, so let's say you must do an audit because of your business practices, because of whatever your particular situation. Once a week, you have to do the audit. And the problem is that if you forgot to do that audit, you, for example, coming next week, and you didn't do that audit, you started doing the audit the next week. Is it for the second week or for the previous week? So I would suggest to configure your GRC tool that would create an audit record every time when the calendar hits the audit calendar. So it would be empty record or whatever. You could fill it up later if you skip, but these audit records, they should be auto generated. And we went through like multiple situations, and we our understanding of how it needs to be done. The empty audit record should be created, and then auditor can go and fill it up. Also, the question of automatic artifacts and manual artifacts. Certainly, if you could automate and push your artifact somewhere in like log solution or GRC, it's good, but also manual artifacts like manual reviews must be collected. And usually auditors taking anything, even like an email or some kind of like a record, but it has to be done, so that the record should be in your GRC system, and it should be the document should be attached, to email should be attached. Yeah, and also when you have that, when you configure your GRC system, you basically have audit pops up, and it should be defined procedure how to do it. Then you could switch the auditors. You could even you're a small company, you basically assign, you are doing this audit, and audit pops up, and the person is saying, oh, open this and that, verify that backups are done. So you could be very flexible on training how to do these audits, and you could have multiple auditors. Just a suggestion. Also, I wanted to show you a methodology that we use to, and how we set up our GRC to basically run the same process and implement any framework that we need for our clients. And I can tell you that we implemented formal cybersecurity program for a company and certified them on ISO, and then Department of Homeland Security came to audit them for paperless customs, and we pass it without any problems. So we use the same methodology for for NIST, for ISO, for like basically like anything high trust. And so first to do basic setup, and you basically put your governance records. And again, it could be done in Excel, in files, in Dropbox, whatever you want to do. But you have to capture certain things. What is your governance? Who can make decisions, your org chart, things like that. Then you do information classification in the UCA factor that we discussed before. Then you do your risk analysis, and the risk analysis is again, you basically trying to figure out what your risks are. And then with your going through your normal life, you constantly adjust your risk registry. Then based on the risk, you do control selections. We know that there are lots of compliance people that are using controls to define the risks. There is not a problem with that. We didn't see any serious problems with that. But our kind of mentality is you figuring out risks, and then you take controls. You assign controls to them. If you have different view, by the way, it would be very interesting if someone in this group use it the other way around, come up with the risks from the controls. So guys, if you use controls and then define the risks based on the controls of any of the frameworks, please say yes in the chat. But I will continue. So then, nice, no, okay. So we select controls, we write policies and procedures. One thing, how much time do we have? Okay, so one thing I wanted to tell you about policies and procedures. I can write it down. I don't have it in these slides, but serious lawyers in health industry taught us how to write it. So I don't know if you know it or not. And please, if I taught you something new, please say yes in the chat. So policies, they have to, you basically take control that you are writing this policy about, and you must use following words: shall, will, must. So usually the control is saying company should have vulnerability management practice, for example. So the policy should sound company shall create vulnerability management practice. So you basically say the same thing that whatever controls say, but use shall, will, must. Strong language. You don't need anything else. You don't need, because we see essays in policies. Now procedures must answer 4 questions: who, when, where, and how. So basically, each policy statement should have a procedure statement that would answer these 4 questions. That's it. Then your documentation becomes very light, very clear, and totally attached to your cybersecurity framework. So guys, if you feel that if you do it, or you feel that this is good advice, please comment something in the chat, because this is how we do it. It takes much less time than like figure out all these essays. So it would be yeah. And there is one question. Good advice, thank you. um, then we implement technology. You need to collect artifacts. You do security operation incident management, you do your yearly reviews, you do yearly audit, and you adjust the risk, as we said. So this is our kind of swirl. Um, and the last thing today I wanted to say, and I don't know if you're in this situation, but what we suggest, sometimes people are in the beginning of their journey and they say, oh, NIST is too much for us, or, you know, ISO is too much for us. We just wanted to begin. So we use two frameworks for tactical beginning of the journey. So it's OWASP if there is software development involved, or we use CIS, and certainly CIS top 10, and you could implement and you can run benchmarks. There is a tooling to run benchmarks, and you could do hardening, and it's like very tactical and very technical. It's very easy to basically follow everything and harden companies to a certain extent. And certainly strategically, we implement like mature frameworks, whatever, NIST, ISO, high trust, PCI, SSA 18, SOC 2 criteria. Poll questions. After an incident is handled, what is the single property? Basically, like after the incident, when you run postmortem, what should you adjust in the risk property? Throw the answers. Yeah, likelihood, definitely. Yep. All right, guys, I think I'm done for today. Throw questions, comments. If you want to unmute and criticize me, I'm totally up for criticism, because again, we're all professionals here. We're not in high school. I'm not a professor. I'm just sharing my view. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Michael. Thank you so much. That's a very informative discussion, and I got to be honest, I really like your open. I really appreciate your spirit and your openness to discussion and debate. There's probably this probably would be healthy if more people took such an open-minded approach, especially in this field and dealing with risk and constant changing threats. So let's see if there's any.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And any additional questions that are coming in? Okay, nothing there. Definitely plenty of comments saying thank you and great stuff and expressing appreciation. Oh, and also mentioning that it's practical and useful to have polls that facilitate such a discussion. So wonderful. Okay, well then, if that's the case and we're through with the first part of the presentation, then I guess maybe we can make sure that Chase has the proper permissions to go ahead and take over the next part of the presentation.
Maybe we should take 2-3 minutes, take a breath, grab coffee, water.
Yes, by all means, feel free to have a couple minute buffer spacer.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to grab a bio break, grab some water, then Chase, please, at your leisure and the time that you think makes sense, go ahead and pick it up. And I like that idea. Nice.
Now let me go ahead with the screen sharing real quick. So, I'm assuming everyone can see that. Yeah. All right, perfect. Sounds great. I'll continue, give everyone a couple minutes. I'll be true to my word. We'll start maybe a little bit right after 5 o'clock local. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining. We're a couple minutes past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. But if you're not back yet, don't worry. So I think the first part of this is just kind of, I'll talk a little bit about introductions and format and kind of what we can expect from the session today. So first and foremost, my name is Chase, and so I look after our strategic and technical partnerships here at Jump Cloud, as well as kind of explain a little bit more of what we do based here in Colorado. So it's good to catch up with everyone on the East Coast. And for this format too, might be a little bit shorter, so I might be able to get you out a little bit earlier, but hopefully we have more of a good discussion, kind of Q&A on the tail end as we work through some of this material. And so what we're going to be talking about today is starting secure. And the way that we're going to be approaching this conversation is kind of how to be secure from the first user. So we're a cloud-based directory. And so when we're thinking about users, that's typically where we start kind of within our thought process of what does the authentication path look like? What does the security path look like? And what you can do around how to have this. And so the thought for this presentation is, imagine you're coming into kind of a blank slate organization, or even better yet, you have a friend, who knows, maybe someone on the street say, hey, how would I start secure? But more likely a friend might be starting a business or other pieces, or even looking after some of those additional certifications that Michael mentioned, right? It could be ISO, could be SOC 2 Type 2, could be PCI, other those pieces. So the conversation is like, what might be those core principles that I'd want to think about within an organization, especially kind of small, medium businesses, because those are the most threat-prone types of organizations as you're thinking about identity, security, and all the different implications that they have. And the other piece too that we wanted to look at is from this user perspective. I think it's really easy to come in, look at organizations holistically, but when you're looking at from the kind of the user path, that will help define your best practices. And then hopefully too, as they grow, right, within their own knowledge and other pieces over time, they're adding in layers of best practices onto a great core that they've already developed. I know that this always isn't the case, right? We might be talking with organizations or kind of entering in, and we might need to attach some other things alongside to help make sure that they're still successful on their path and kind of their journey while they're thinking about how to be secure, how to be compliant, and what are the best practices that evolve all around those pieces. The other piece why users are very important, not only because it's a good perspective to start with, but it's also very heavily used in terms of breaches and attacks and everything else, right? So over 60% leverage these stolen credentials, right? Because a lot of the times it's not necessarily the data behind it, because the credential could be even more important, right? Because it's data from here, and then we can log into this area, or maybe there's another login from a different account that we can leverage. All of those different pieces combine into those credentials. And I like this quote mostly because, glazed donuts are the best, but it does kind of help describe the universality of users when they're interacting with different pieces and kind of the power that it conveys. So let's start from there and kind of understand, I'd say, a few of the different components when you're thinking about those types of access points. First, what is a user, right? So I think this inherently comes very naturally for a lot of us, but I think it's also helpful to come back into what does that mean? Where does that start from, right? And so users, right, are just their best digital version of themselves that we've kind of transported from their physical bodies, right? And kind of we've given them now additional attributes, we've given them additional access points, points of authorization, and all of these pieces help combine into what this ideal user should have access to, right? But it's always good and helpful, right? That they come from real humans, and real humans have their own biases and problems, and they're also really great to work with sometimes too. And so making sure that you're inheriting a lot of those different aspects when you're thinking about users, their interactions, and kind of what they need to have done. And so we'll kind of look at it from, I'd say, not necessarily pillars, but kind of three different components as we're thinking about users, right? Are they safe? Are they secure? Which they might kind of, this feels like they're very similar. So I think when I'm talking about things being safe, it's kind of where are they located? Where do they exist within their creation? Kind of how they get there. And then from secure, it's more around when they're out there in the wild, when they're talking with other services, when they're getting and authenticating in different areas, how are they doing that securely? Which will kind of be the bulk of what we'll be talking about today. But then the third, and usually the most important, especially for smaller businesses or people that are starting out, is how can I make this easy? How can I make this really seamless for not only IT admins or the security team or who's ever implementing these policies, but then also for the users themselves, right? Because if it's more seamless for them, they're more likely to follow all the procedures. They're more likely to have everything put in place that you're recommending or kind of guiding them through. And usually the first two are reserved for larger organizations. And it's that third piece of it really feels heavy and making sure that we can get it, I'd say holistically around all those different types of businesses that you interact with. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is, what does it mean to be safe? So typically when we are thinking about, my identity, right? It's got to be safe. It's got to be somewhere. And this is typically an image that might be conjured up, right? Either internally, externally. I certainly hopefully have this image, right? When I'm thinking about all the different places that my identity lives, where it's, nice, clean, doors, locks, great, beautiful server racks, all those pieces. But in the reality for a lot of folks, especially working within smaller organizations, it might look a little bit closer to this, right? Where you've kind of started out with some practices, maybe like, all right, phone server there, but then over time, everything kind of gets a little bit more convoluted. It's not managed as well as it could have because there's a lot of different priorities. There's a lot of different things that are happening within an organization to make that organization successful. So how can you essentially kind of mitigate and bring this back a little bit more? And this also becomes a primary target. So there's usually typically headlines like these, right, where folks are really looking at those identities as kind of the crown jewels to the organization. And how can we compromise those and get into the organization through that, right? Are there patches? Are there other areas? And this will typically come in the form of on-premise servers for kind of the reasons I just described. Not only, let's say, you think about physical aspect now, right? And so if the server room gets flooded or something gets on fire, which usually you throw out there in kind of a left-hand side, but who knows, increasing natural disasters and all that, and it might be even more of a physical risk than there have been in the past. But also mainly where it comes from is, what is the type of care and feeding that looks to make sure that you are securely sound as a progression and as technologies kind of evolve over time. And actually here is just another recent one that came out yesterday, where they kind of did a huge scan of, I think, 30,000, maybe just shy of that, different databases, just to kind of see where vulnerabilities land. And a lot of them have critical flaws because just for all those pieces that we've discussed of what does that look like to make sure that they're up to date, kind of up to snuff. So when you're thinking about users, where they live and kind of other pieces, that's why it's typically easier to kind of think about, okay, well, let's get them, one, out of a physical box, and then two, virtualize them a little bit further. Now we can start thinking about some of those better practices around redundancies, disaster recovery, all of those different areas that are baked into, I'd say, a lot of the larger global providers. But then you're also starting to think about access points. As the organization grows, you're no longer tethered to something that you kind of have to manually boost out or kind of think about kind of that care and feeding. And so you're increasing not only your security more so, because it's a little bit of a different message, because most people think, well, if I can see it, I can feel it, I can touch it, like it's right there. But that actually puts you at risk. And so what we want to do is actually enhance that. We want to make sure it's redundant. We want to make sure it's replicated. We want to make sure that also with that, one of the other pieces we talked about is kind of the availability, right, that you might be having from your service. That not only extends from your business, right, and making sure that you are available to your customers, but also kind of how you're thinking about your identity and your security posture and what that looks like. So I'd say a quick poll. I'm curious from the audience, or kind of when you're thinking about your corporate identity, right, and I'm sure your personal identity is all over the place. But where does your identities live? Or do they live on kind of an on-premise server, maybe Active Directory, maybe somewhere in the cloud, maybe a little bit of mix, not at all. And so I think we've been throwing a few of those either in the polling section, but feel free to throw them in the chat as well. All right. So I'm already seeing a bunch, and it's similar to kind of what I would expect, right? Which is true, just kind of given the market share, how organizations evolve over time, and what that looks like. And where I'd say most organizations' security posture really started with Active Directory. And so now we have a lot of folks who are trying to think, how do we migrate and kind of evolve beyond that while maintaining a lot of, let's say, the essence that it brought into the market when it was first introduced. A couple more seconds, I don't think I should go. So that's really So thank you for indulging me. It's always fun to kind of see where all the origin stories of a lot of different identities begin. And so now we'll kind of think about, what does it take to have a secure organization, right? So kind of coming back to that list, if you will, you're chatting with a friend and say, okay, now we're going to secure everything, right? What does that look like from a couple different pieces? Fortunately, we've already talked about kind of how to secure users, where they live, and what that looks like. So we can cross that off of our list. But the next piece we kind of need to think about is they don't really live on an island, right? So even though we create a user, but you don't give it access to anything, right? Does it make a sound? Does the user authenticate in anything? And so when we want to take that next step and understand how we can get that user authentication into all the different things that we need in order to get our work done. And so for us, the next thing that we will typically think about are the devices. Devices in the sense of, this is what we're calling in on. This is the webinar that we're being hosted on, where I'm being able to present on. And so being able to understand the device security posture is critical. And we typically say that the device is the gateway for a lot of the different activities and kind of how identities operate within the real world. And there's a couple different ways that you can start to think about managing those devices and what that looks like. Typically those come in the form of either an MDM or an RMM. There's also a UEM, so like kind of all the different acronyms around that. But within each of those, you're thinking about managing that device and essentially ownership, or kind of ownership in the sense of not physically, but like making sure that it's registered, it's a trusted device. And one of the ways that we do that is we typically, at least in most organizations, will drop an agent on that, right? And so some root level agent that will likely live on the machine, but that is kind of now what's garnering access between, well, what type of users should I have on this device? What type of policies and other areas that I should bring down onto this device? So now you can start to think about, well, is the disk encrypted? Did I disable USB storage? Did I change the screensaver? Did I think about, what is the patch management strategy for this device as it compares to not only this individually, but also thinking about groups of devices, fleets of devices, different device types, right? And so I imagine for a lot of you kind of coming from a Windows background, there will be a bits of that, but then how do you think about managing Macs within the environment, maybe some Linux infrastructure around that? This is particularly helpful when you're thinking about DevOps use cases, where devices in the sense isn't even really a physical device anymore, but it could be something, EC2 instance that you've spun up, or another VM somewhere that you're trying to access. And how do we kind of think about what does that look like? So we're not only ensuring the device, we trust the device, there's a certificate running on it, but we're also able to apply the policies, apply the procedures that we need on that device to make sure that we're secure moving forward. So another quick question, I think I have a guess around this, but I'd love to just kind of get a sense of what are the types of devices within your environment. You can also add in personal devices or other things here too. Just kind of get a sense of what that looks like when we're thinking about taking your digital identity and then putting it into something physical to kind of get your work done. And as I'm reading along this, in terms of professional feedback, I am also not a professional survey taker. So I realize that there's probably a mix up between, a mix and all three, or kind of anything else kind of beyond that. So you can also treat that as kind of another. But it's good to see, essentially, there's a lot of heterogeneity that you need to think about within the environment, right? And not a one size fits all approach. Certainly within a Windows type of environment, you see that a little bit closer, but then as you start to have a mix of those, and it's like, well, what are the similar type of policies that I should start thinking about? How do I have fully encrypted disks across Mac OS file vault and Linux, and I'd say also not just Linux, but what are the types of distributions that I need to think about when I'm enabling those services? And then if there's any delta within that environment that I need to be thinking about when we're applying those types of security updates. Okay, so we've gotten through, most important part, we have users, and we've talked a little bit more about how to secure devices and kind of what that looks like. And so when we're thinking about the user path, I'm a user, open up the lid, great, I've authenticated into it. Well, now what? Well, now I need to get into the network, right? Because there's not too many things that we like to do, at least locally. And so we really want to pull in that information, but how does that look like from a user and IT admin perspective? And so apologies kind of look like a matrix pill, kind of a choose your own reality, as I'm sure a lot of us are. But when we're thinking about internal and external, kind of what are those access points that look like? And so internally, more often than not, what this looks like is in the form of a radius server. And so ideally a cloud radius server where you're kind of acting as that authentication. And it's a very, I'd say it's an older protocol for sure, because there's dial-up in the name, right? So remote authentication dial-up, there's a dial-in user service, right? As you can combine there. But it's also really helpful when you're thinking about that's a key access point for a lot of, I'd say, equipment out there as well, kind of like yes, no, right? Can I authenticate this user based on this protocol or not? And it's a really easy, seamless way for folks to get spun up, especially it works with a ton of different equipment out there in the wild. And then you think about the external factors, and then this is oversimplified, right? Because you can think about all the additional services, antivirus, other pieces that you want to have on that, both at the network level, but then also on the device level as well. So are you thinking about implementing a VPN? Should it be just for select, I'd say top tier secure one assets, or is it across anything in the corporate? Is it thinking about firewall? Is it firewall almost as a service, kind of living on the device level, and how you're thinking about managing that external traffic? But for a lot of us, these worlds are starting to collide a little bit more. So as you're thinking about people are going back into the office a little bit more, or people are actually going into different offices. So we've, even within Jump Cloud, we've hired a lot of folks, different states, but now we've also had a lot of people move from state to state. And so as you're thinking about that, how do I think about network access in different areas, different IP ranges, but then also making sure that regardless, even if they're not coming into, let's say a corporate owned kind of area or network, making sure that they're secure wherever they are, because that's a reality for a lot of our organizations now. So coming down our list, we've knocked off the network, which is great. So now we were in the device. Now we're talking, what was the first thing that we usually type into the browser? So it's like, well, what are the types of applications that I now need access to actually get my work done, right? So making sure that I can hop in email, making sure I can catch up on Slack, but then also planning work, thinking about, is there additional development resources that might be there, different marketing assets, Salesforce, CRM providers, all of those different caveats that now you're thinking about. This comes a little bit back to kind of the user path of, okay, as I join an organization, what are the right level of attributes and authentication that I need to think about? And this is especially interesting, right, as the number of applications grow within organizations, because now you have a kind of a constant scaling matrix, if you will, of what type of applications not only are available, but who has access to what are the types of permissions within that, and how do we make sure that over time that still stays true? Because new positions are created, people are promoted, a lot of people leave the organization as well. You might also be, I'd say, bringing in an organization in some instances, whether it's M&A activity, where these constant points are kind of how you're thinking about who has access to what. Because kind of a core tenet as we're talking about kind of all of these different secure measures is, do I have the right users? Are they coming in at the right level? And are they doing it at the right time? And it's this, kind of the last piece too, that kind of gives a little bit more of a nuance where maybe you need to elevate permission levels or kind of understand what that looks like for a couple of users. And then also remembering to revoke that, right? Or kind of reduce back down to standard instead of, and removing pseudo privileges or whatever that might be. But then also thinking about the time within the organization, right? So an employee who's left, that is also the best time to kind of remove, making sure that they no longer have access. And so that way we're thinking about secure offboarding practices and everything else that's involved with them. So we have our laps, and really we've done a lot at this point. I think if you are able to stand this up, pat yourself on the back. I think it's time for lunch. I know it's actually probably getting closer to happy hour time, right? And so we've kind of earned it. We've walked through all of these different pieces of what it looks like to secure a user, kind of all the way into accessing their applications, just kind of as a base. But then, like everything else, there's probably one more thing that we should be focusing on is, how do we know that user is really who they say they are? How can we now add in additional factors of authentication for that user, making sure that we know who they say they are, they're accessing the right types of resources that they have, and when possible, right, throwing those challenges, making sure that able to respond in a timely manner and across a variety of mediums of what that looks like for our users. And this could come in a bunch of different forms, right? And so whether you're even thinking about network access, right, and kind of having that ready server return an MFA at the device level as well. And this takes a bunch of different forms. So here we have an example of kind of just a TOTP code that is generated, and this might be helpful for offline scenario. Or there might be other, for especially those who kind of in Macs and mixed environments, biometrics, other areas that you can pull natively from the machine to make sure, okay, there's continuous kind of a second factor there, and kind of how all of our devices play together. So we've talked about a lot of the pieces, right? And so we've covered a little bit more, where users are, making sure that they're safe, and then also walking through all the different components as we want to think about how do we secure those users kind of within, I'd say, 0 to action of understanding where they are. But now I want to spend a little bit more time on what this looks like to make sure that it's seamless. And so as you're thinking about either implementing practices you might already be interacting with, how can you make it easy for everyone to think about implementing these security controls, especially, coming back to the conversation, hey, eventually we're starting this company, we want to get to all these pieces. The first barrier of that is making sure that it feels achievable, making sure that, oh yeah, we got this, right? We started secure, we have all these different practices built from the users out. So now it's just really kind of taking all those pieces. So we're going to switch up our list a little bit. And so instead of securing all the things, now we'll kind of take a very similar path in thinking about how can we simplify a lot of those actions. So that way, if you're kind of describing the best path forward, what that looks like, it's easy. People want to do it. People want to follow along. So first, we'll come back to our users, right? So at this point, we've digitized them. They're showing up in our system. But another piece too that we want to think about is actually, where did they come from? Because usually users don't just pop out of nowhere. They typically come from a bunch of different sources, and I've just listed a few to kind of give an example. But you might have users come from different sizes and flavors of HRIS providers, or kind of payroll, human capital management, kind of that group of organizations where, because before they were an employee, before they were a user, they were actually an applicant. They were hiring. They were kind of going through HR in terms of payroll and other pieces. And so starting to think about kind of first point of where users are created. And so for other organizations, and especially kind of coming back to first poll, where it's kind of like, no, it's kind of email only. Email is usually the first instance for a lot of organizations, especially new businesses, as they're thinking about what's their first form of a digital identity. So making sure that we can pull from those resources as well, so that way we're working in concert with everything else where those identities are coming from, and managing, I'd say, the whole use case, or the whole life cycle that you'll see across user management. And so now we kind of simplified users, they're implemented, they're integrated. The next piece is, how do we make devices a lot easier? This picture is funny. So when I joined JumpCloud several years ago, this was kind of our, this is how we got machines, right? So we'd line them up, we'd make sure that all the policies were there. We'd, hand them out to employees in person, and making sure, so there's kind of a scheduled batch, right, that we would go through. And this is one of the pieces that a lot of IT and security teams kind of line up now, right? And so fast forward, here we are, 2021. What does that look like now? How do we make that even easier, instead of, great, I ordered it, now I'll come here, I'll unbox it, and then I'll reship it out and kind of get it out. So one of the pieces of kind of, certainly in terms of JumpCloud we're shifting to, is kind of a zero touch model. So how can we think about devices very seamlessly from their beginning, from their origin? So that way, if I know that I'm going to order a device, it will already have all the proper authentication. It will already have their identity loaded on the machine. It will already have a lot of those policies. And if they're not on that policies, they will start to kick off and download and run those scripts as soon as it connects to the network, right? So kind of thinking about what is the ideal golden image for a lot of these devices that look like. So that way, when you're hopping on, you are no longer kind of just going through the motion of taking a user and digitizing it. You already know who they are, right? You're kind of meeting them where they are. And this is a lot easier from the user perspective now, because then you say, hey, just think about this one login, and that has your access to everything. But then that's also known that because that's a secure login, we'll manage it across all the different paths that you will be authenticating through as a user. So we got devices out of the way, drop shipped, we'll open it up, everything's gravy. But now we're on the network, we're running through it, and we kind of think about applications. And for a lot of us, this comes in the form of single sign-on, right? When we're thinking about kind of a combination of both seamless and secure access into different types of applications. And this looks after two different protocols that we typically come after. So the first is SAML. I'd say this is the most popular. This makes up, I'd say, a large catalog, a large piece of most providers' catalogs in terms of the applications they have access to, mainly because this has grown over time from the service providers, right? If you think about all the different applications you're logging into, they support this type of protocol where you're managing, okay, single authentication from one source into another. However, what we're seeing is a large growth in the SCIM protocol, which is great. And the big difference kind of between the two is when you're thinking about SCIM, it's all the same kind of access. You're carrying along attributes and everything that you need around the user perspective. But now you're also managing that identity. So you can think about it from an onboarding and offboarding scenario. New employee joins a brand new startup. Great, we're going to get you provisioned. And so now we're leveraging this protocol. So not only am I creating a core user identity that I can leverage across devices and networks and other areas, but now I'm taking that same identity and provisioning it into each one of the different applications that user needs access to. So you can think about this from a DevOps use case where, okay, great, now I'm creating an AWS user, now I'm creating a Slack user. Maybe I need to get them in at Atlassian for Jello support, Jira support. Maybe there's analytics inside with Datadog, other pieces. Again, this is a little bit more reliant on which type of software providers are allowing, let's say, core directory providers, IDPs, in terms of accessing the SCIM protocol to leverage that. But that's really helpful too when you're on the opposite side of the coin of, great, we actually need to suspend this user, right? And so now we're going to be revoking access across the network and devices, but now we can actually pull access from each one of these different applications instantly. They'll still kind of have that, but now you also have that convenience of, well, great, I don't have to deregister the user or go back and delete a whole bunch or kind of other pieces. So that way it's a security system that evolves with you as the organization evolves, adds users, rotates user permissions, kind of all those different pieces that you can think about. So we've kind of reached this pinnacle, right? So now we have a secure user, cross-network device applications, all of those different pieces have now come into one. And I'd say that's probably the key piece for a lot of this is, how are you able to take everything on our list that we've created, kind of combine it at least into one system, one point of view that you can have as you grow across with the organization. But coming back from lunch, right? We also forgot that we actually need to make MFA really easy, because this is one of those areas that, regardless of what's happening across the system and kind of your policies and other pieces, there's always this great last defense of, are you really who you are and say you are, right? Can you do that in an easy way? And this takes on a couple different areas. We mentioned TOTP earlier, kind of using the passcodes are great for an offline. If you're around, you kind of increase that ease with kind of a push authentication where possible. So that way, yes, the user confirm it, super easy. It's just one more button that I have to have. But that's also a likely scenario where you have a much higher user adoption rate of making sure that those security practices are put in place, because it's easy, right? It's not a burdensome ask to add into the work that they're already trying to do, because security compliance is not top mind for a lot of these users. So we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible. And so we've been talking a lot about the identities of users, where they live, how they happen. One of the other pieces that I want to touch on now is who's kind of managing all that, right? And so especially kind of within the world that we've, let's say, evolved into, and certainly this is more recent for a lot of organizations the past 18 months or so, but even before that, as you're thinking about global organizations or organizations with different office sites in other areas, is how do you have this access point of the location agnostic admin, right? Users are here, admin might be different time zone, different state, even different countries. And so how do you make sure that you're still managing that access? Because again, there's a little bit more of a, it's a disassociation, right? Because it's like, it's always easier kind of like, well, I see the people, they're there, they're accessing the stuff, where in reality, it's no longer the case. And so what used to be what I kind of call the James Bond scenario, right? And so you're kind of like, hey, you fly in, you grab the company's secrets on a laptop, you run off to Tahiti, and now what do you do? And so fortunately, over time, right, kind of with additional security postures and modern architecture, don't really have to worry about that so much, right? So one, we got MFA on there, right, before we went out to, lunch and dinner. But then two, you're thinking about all the different access points that we were thinking about is, did they have the right level of user permissions? Are we still managing that device? Where's that user coming in from? Can we deny it based on IP? All those different areas. And so while this scenario might be less likely for a lot of organizations, you might be faced with another scenario, right? And so say, for example, certainly as kind of remote work picks up and you have a bunch of friends going on a camping trip, but you left your laptop on there, right? And so like this is, the equivalent of kind of leaving on the bus scenario, but what happens now? And so if you're thinking about this from IT perspective, security operations perspective, what are the types of actions that you can take to remedy that, right? And so like, actually, it doesn't matter where I am because I'm a location agnostic admin. So that way I know that I can hop into my access point, my cloud directory, suspend that user, and I know that I'm pulling that user off of everything, including that device, different access points, other pieces, if that identity is compromised. Or if we really trust them, right, and it is just kind of out in the back of Utah, it's like, okay, well, we'll move that device, we'll wipe that device, we'll make sure that anything that was surrounding that has kind of done it. So you can kind of do it in multiple different levels as you start to think about what is that situation. Coming back to original questions, kind of like, what's the motivation, right? If it's a malicious attack, obviously cover all 9 yards. But even if it's something internal, right, you kind of raise suspicions and you kind of understand, okay, I really want to understand motivation behind this, what happened there. And hopefully too, there's a lot of good concrete, I'd say, communication between HR teams, security teams, and making sure that everyone's up to date on who has access to what as those employees modify over time, get promoted, leave the organization, and everything else in between. So we've covered a bit, right, in terms of how we think about safe identities, what that looks like internally, where those identities should live, and kind of how to begin, at least start thinking about migrating them, making sure that they're cloud, they're globally redundant, you have additional policies put in place so that way when you're creating those users, they're really safe. Now, the next piece, right, in terms of thinking about how secure they are, as you're going through kind of your checklist item of, well, what are the key, let's say, features, kind of principles as you think about security of where do these users go and meander into, right? What trouble can they get themselves into? But if you're starting from a secure posture and kind of understanding from the base where that user goes, that path gets a lot easier to think about all the different access points and then additional tooling that you can add in, better practices that you can layer on, and then also start to think about the delta between where you are now, right, if your current security practice, but again, kind of coming from a, let's say, a blank page type of mode, where you're able to improve on, right? Because there's always something cyclical here that you can improve on around where you're thinking about these types of pieces. And then finally, making sure it's easy, right? All those different pieces, because regardless of what you hope to achieve in kind of a security posture that you lay within the organization, users have their own agenda, right? And certainly own motivations on kind of what that looks like. So if you're making sure that it's easier to adopt, not only for the end customers to make sure that they're there, but also internally, right? So as you're making recommendations, what does that look like? It's really easy for folks to be like, yeah, that's actually a change that we can implement right away, right? Oh, something came out, right, let's run a patch across all of our devices. Oh, there's an issue with an application, actually, let's revoke that and move on. So that way, not only does the implementation of a lot of these, but also the remediation of all of those areas become a little bit easier too, because they're meeting you in a bunch of different mediums, making sure that, you know, now since it's globally available, you can operate wherever you are. And the final piece, right? And so we've talked a lot about all of these kind of components, and say you're recommending to your friend kind of get started. They might not be ready at that point, but the underlying principle across all of these different pieces and everything that I've just described is, can it be auditable, right? Can we understand who was accessing what, when they were doing it, where did they come from? All of those different types of information. So that way, even change state and user status, associations to different groups, all those different areas come back into, now I can create a holistic picture of here's what everyone is up to, understanding what's going on, and then also get a sense of, you know, where do we need to spend our time and attention on, right? And so, and then taking that, integrating it with anything else. I'd say there's a lot of different scenes out in the market, alerting systems, other areas. So that way, now you can kind of not only have a holistic picture of what that looks like, but you're immediately taking action, understanding what's going on across the organization, and making sure that folks are secure wherever they are. So hopefully you have a couple different principles as you start to think about, let's say, a blank slate coming into an organization, or, you know, crafting with a friend on the back of a napkin on what a future organization could look like. Because I'm sure just within conversations, both professionally and personally, you know, understanding kind of how you live in the space, your point of view, I'm sure folks come up to it because you are looked at as thought leaders within your community. Certainly kind of joining a chapter like this, continuous education involved, and you'll kind of be, you know, poach for thoughts, opinions. How does this look like? What does that look like? So hopefully now you have a couple different areas for, if I had a wide open scenario, anything else is possible. Here are just some of the key attributes that you could start to think about when you're starting secure from the user, and making sure that that journey holistically is secure. So I want to thank you so much for your time. And we're a little bit shorter on time, so I might be able to kind of get you out a little bit early. So if you enjoyed this session, feel free, grab a t-shirt. If you didn't enjoy the session, feel free to, you also get a t-shirt. It looks like this, right? And so we'd happy to send one out to you. But I'd love to transition either into chat, questions, anything else that we can help, and hopefully that triggered some conversation.
Great, thanks, Chase. So we can go ahead now and monitor the Q&A module to see if there's any questions that come in, and then also pull up the chat as well and see if any additional questions come in. So one of the things that I'll maybe kind of throw out at you, Chase, while we're seeing who's going to write in questions, and while we're waiting on some of these to come in, is I know that a lot of times when organizations are going through looking at each of these sort of components that you're talking about, managing these different aspects of risk, a lot of times they're asking themselves, like, you know, I get a lot of calls where somebody says, oh, I'm going to take care of everything on a single pane of glass, and oh, I've got this one solution that's going to take care of everything, and oh, by the way, now you know, we've perfected some certain craft, and truly, I don't mean to take that lightly, truly, like, there are some remarkable products coming out there, but a lot of times the teams and maybe even internal auditors are involved in these conversations about how to, like, evaluate these things from a cost benefit perspective, and how to look at, like, choosing the right things, the right components, and go through specifically with, like, quantifying and prioritizing those things. You have any thoughts about those kinds of scenarios?
I do, because I'd say we come at it from the perspective that, you know, we try to present as much of that as a single pane of glass as possible, right? So we kind of live a little bit closer in that camp. But what I mean by that, in some of the questions I asked too, just kind of where the identities live, a lot of it is understanding, okay, where's the base? Where are you starting from? Because you might not be in the position to kind of bring in an entire platform all at once. Within Jump Cloud, we're a little bit more, special, different, you can kind of pick your terminology there. But we operate within a mixed environment. So Mac, Windows, Linux, it doesn't really matter for us because we're able to lay down a lot of those different policies, managing users, SSO access, as well as the analytics behind all that. So we help provide that as much as possible within a single frame for organizations. Now, I'll caveat that, right? Because that's definitely part of the pitch, is that it's not always that clean, right? And so when you're thinking about that, that's also just from, again, our user perspective, which is arguably quite a bit of data, right, of understanding where those users live, but it's not the whole story. There's always additional context that you have coming in. Other pieces that you can think about too, especially as you're thinking about network access and understanding pieces is, what are the other signals, right? So is antivirus picking something out? Is there something else, other threats that we need to be aware of? Was a breach disclosed and a fix in real time, right? And so kind of like other pieces that you can start to bring in. And so while we will help provide kind of what that internal view and picture looks like, it's also critical to understand all the different pieces that you need. And then I'd say the second follow-up into that, just since I specifically live within our partnerships and technology partnerships and making sure that, we work with everything in the stack, is understanding how everyone else is thinking about that data. How can that be consumed, right? And so say, for example, it's like, great, I want to take all of that, but I actually want to put it into a very sophisticated alerting system with workflows and use cases and other things. So that way, as I'm thinking about disaster response or kind of, essentially actual use cases to those policies and procedures, what does that look like? Is there another automation tool that works with, and how do we manage that access? But then also too, are there other pieces that we need for different types of organizations? What does this look like? This becomes especially messy in M&A certain conversations as well, when you think about just different types of entities that are now, and like, how do I get a sense of what type of data, right, it might be coming at me in the future? So it's something that we hear quite a bit in terms of how we're able to consolidate a lot of those pieces, but then very real awareness of what else is in the environment.
Makes sense. Let's see. And then I think there's a hand raised. Arian, did you, is there a question that you wanted to ask? Did you want to put something in the chat or? No, okay, never mind. That must have been something else. No problem. All right, then let's see. Oh, there's a question here that says, okay, yeah, this is tricky. What are your thoughts on legacy systems access?
It's easier if I was to say, well, I'm a consultant, I'll put on my consultant hat and say, well, it depends, right? Because like that's the best answer. I think outside of that, because that's a less helpful answer, I'd say, like, let's move a little bit more into some of the principles that we talked about and understanding, okay, what type of legacy system is it? What's available there? And, who needs access to that? So the hardest piece about all of those things is typically, even mentioning the word legacy, it's like, it's kind of almost semi-forgotten already. You're like, oh yeah, about that thing. That's it. Oh yeah, it might be, maybe it's like network attached storage or something like that within a physical office. That might be deemed legacy, or there might be just another access point you're thinking about. So hopefully, if you're thinking about, maybe it's an access control matrix, similar kind of thinking how we're thinking about applications, but who has access to what and when, and making sure that they're on a rotation of understanding what that looks like. Then you can also start to think about, okay, is that something that I can change authorization to, right? So coming back to the secure point of like, are we doing it at the right time? Do I need to just grant an individual time into the sensitive resource? If it's legacy, it might be sensitive or kind of removed from, let's say the core organization or kind of operations around that. And then, kind of what does that look like? Making sure that we turn it off. And, finally, my holistic thought on that is, how do we get it not legacy? How do we get it into, I'd say, our day-to-day systems? What does that look like? What's the type of data that's different? Sometimes your hands are tied fundamentally based on It could be the data structure that it's holding. It could be other key components of the organization. So you might not always have that option. But typically there is at least a path, so that way there's more awareness around what might be in a system where, and then the key piece of that is like, can we automate it, right? So can we make sure that if we need to do this, I'm granting or revoking privileges to that near instantly, or there's workflows set up so that way I view it similar to other access points. So hopefully, that was probably a longer rambling answer. So Rick, let me know if that answers your question, or if there's more specifics I can dive into.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question, Rick, and that thoughtful response, Chase. All right, so let's see if there's any other follow-up. No, just comments saying, oh yeah, no, Chase says that was good. All right, wonderful. All right, Rick says that was good. Okay, excellent. Then we will go ahead and wrap up there for the day. This is obviously day 2 of a 3-day event. And so tomorrow we will have day 3 presented by Digital Edge of this 3-part series on hackers versus standards and lawmakers. And we hope that you'll be able to join us tomorrow as well. For anyone who is celebrating the holiday, we wish you an easy fast, and hope that you get to spend some meaningful time with family. For those people who are going to be with us tomorrow, then we look forward to seeing you then. And until then, have a great evening. And don't forget that we will be providing CPE certificates within approximately 1 week of this event. So keep just a little bit of patience for us on that. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chase. Thanks, Yana and Michael and the Digital Edge team.
Thank you.
And then thanks, Ryan as well for a great session. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.